Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are looking at Dante's Divine Comedy, and we are on Purgatory. And what we're going to do today, the format, is that everybody will get an opportunity to talk about what they got from the reading. We're going to start with Phil, but everybody gets to talk about that. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share what you got from your reading. You can also talk about what you're getting from Dante in general, if you want. And after everybody has a chance to put their first thoughts on the table, we are going to go into breakout rooms to discuss Dante with a smaller group of people in a free flow back and forth. And then we come back with the best questions that we have on Dante or the reading. And then we will try to answer all those questions in a lightning round. So that's the format. Let's get started. Phil, the floor is yours.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Please.
Okay, let me try that. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I got some really good feedback from people enjoying the spreadsheet, and since Dante is very organized, he very much lends himself, the way his writing is structured, it's so structured, it lends itself to creating these lists in order to jog our memory and to summarize concepts and to take in the enormous amount of topics that he touches on throughout the journey. So now we're, obviously we've reached the end of Purgatory. We're about to ascend to heaven. But looking back, we've covered so much ground, and I want to just take a minute to possibly try to summarize where we've been, because it's pretty amazing how much we've been able to cover. Is this too small, or should I make this a little bit bigger?
If you could make it bigger.
Yeah, that would be okay.
A little bit more. Yeah, that's good.
That's good. Okay. So,
just do one more step. Even if you lose the note, that's fine.
Is that good?
A little bit more. Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. So as you've been reading, of course, we've been going through one terrace to the next, being cleansed from different types of vices with Dante. And this little list that I've put together just summarizes the journey and also the sort of the underlying philosophy of Dante towards vice and cleansing. And I guess that's one of the biggest themes in all of Commedia, but particularly in Purgatory, getting cleansed from sin. And just like in Inferno, we have a central canto that discusses the overall philosophy of these different vices, and that central canto is Canto 17. I'm not going to turn there now, but basically it styles all of these vices in terms of either wrong kind of love or deficient kind of love. So in the first three terraces, the problem is the object of love itself is misplaced. And so we have pride and envy and wrath, where people are either loving themselves or loving someone else's position or their own sense of injury, perhaps. And that creates some sort of vice, pride, envy, and wrath, respectively. Then we have the middle terrace 4, where we have sloth or negligence. And there, the idea is you can love something, but not with enough zeal. So there's a lack of sort of volume in your love, lack of intensity, and that's deficient love. And then the last three terraces, greed, gluttony, and lust, that's excessive love. So love without moderation. So basically, their natural desires to eat, to accumulate some earthly possessions, but then we can do that without moderation. And this is very Aristotelian, right? It harkens back to the idea of a golden middle and So that's what's being dealt with in the latter terraces. And then I tried to, I'm not sure if how accurate this is, but you can almost see a parallel to the Inferno. So we start in Inferno, we go from the least offensive things to the most offensive things. And then in Purgatory, the order is reversed, but the vices themselves are actually the same, almost the same. There are a couple that are missing, but well, maybe one, but most of the vices that are being purged are exactly the same ones that are in Inferno. They're just, the order is reversed. So we start with the most heinous sin of pride, and then lust is the least offensive. That's what we end up with on Terrace 7. So that's something very I wanted to share. Then I also uploaded the different hymns. As we go through different terraces, there are different hymns that are sung appropriate to each terrace. And if you want to have a quick list of that, then take a look at that other document I uploaded. Let me share one other thing. Let me just share my screen again. Okay. So this is another way to look at what we've been doing, which is to think about what are the major themes in the Purgatory as a whole. And of course, one of them I just mentioned, the nature of sin and virtue and cleansing. And again, if you read Canto 17, that's where really the crux of Dante's argument is elaborated through Virgil. And then, of course, the other big theme is Virgil himself. We end up with Virgil leaving us, which is a very emotional, a very momentous event. And of course, throughout Purgatory, the question is, what is the relationship of Virgil as representing classical antiquity to Christian thought, Christian philosophy? And why does he have to leave us? You know, why isn't he saved? Why is there some deficiency in him? What is that deficiency? All very interesting topics. I'm curious what other people think about that. Then, of course, throughout the book, Dante intertwines historical context to put everything into, I guess, make it real for his readers in the historical context. And there are lots of references to different Italian city-states and particular vices that he finds there. And also this question of church versus empire, as this period is super interesting in terms of what's happening with papacy and all the different French kings and Italian rulers, city rulers, and the relationship between the Holy Roman Empire and the kings that are now gaining power, political power. And so all of that is very clearly present, especially in those last chapters where we talk about church and the pageant of the church militant and triumphant and all that. So very, like I said, I'm just going to put these big topics out there for anyone to discuss. I'm curious what other people think about any of these subjects without delving into themselves. Then also there's my favorite subject, which is Dante and Beatrice. Of course, Beatrice is the one that arrives on the scene in Purgatory, and then we end up with her being Dante's new guide through Paradise. And that raises all kinds of interesting questions about medieval attitude to women, the subject of courtly love and women. I think a lot of times you hear that women were pretty much denigrated in medieval society, but I think reading Dante should at least make this much more controversial subject, if not maybe completely just demolish that thesis, because obviously he has a very high respect for Beatrice, very high respect for Mary as sort of the medium of salvation in some ways. And then, of course, the whole idea of sweet new style as an evolution from the more crude version of courtly love poetry raises all kinds of questions about, you know, what was the real medieval attitude towards women, and probably it was much more nuanced and complex than just what we typically hear about. So those are some major themes. I thought I'd just bring them up and let people think about that and leave it there. So that's all I have to say this time.
Thank you, Phil. All right, so folks, if you'd like to, I encourage you to talk about what you have gotten from Purgatory or Dante in general. Go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. First up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
There was a few things that I had gotten from this, and I like the way Phil had actually laid that out. Why Virgil's left behind and not saved. And I kind of really got that feeling as well, especially considering when somebody like Cato's in Purgatory who committed suicide. It's kind of like, you just really couldn't push him over the edge or something. And that's just the thought, though. In this particular, these cantos in particular, I found that in aligning with the idea of the church and the empire, his interaction with Donati to be especially significant. They were, essentially, lamenting over the over all the ills that exist in Florence current day. And I forget who it was, Pope, maybe I'm going to say Pope Leo, that they had, or Pope. I forget. The name's not coming to me right at the moment. Maybe Pope Martin. Yes, thank you. That, and then I also found it also to be pretty interesting that, just going through the idea of the wall of flames is being cleansed one last time. Well, not one last time, but one of the times in order to get to the Garden of Eden. I was also surprised that it was the Garden of Eden that was there. I don't understand, like, it kind of seems like kind of reverse, like we fell from the Garden of Eden and now we're coming back to it. It seemed, I don't know, it was a surprise to see that. And his interaction with Matilda, his interaction with Beatrice is what really kind of took me back the most, this entire set of cantos. She didn't seem to be, I was expecting something a little bit more, rewarding. And it was just more or less explaining to him what he had done wrong after she had died, how he had fallen astray. And I think that in and of itself is that was pretty, that was telling, because and I also got a feeling that Beatrice is really, again, the Blessed Mother, is symbolic of the Blessed Mother as an idealized person, which is something I had gotten in La Vita Nuova as well. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head here. He goes through the second baptism as well, and that this cleansing of his sins, and that's pretty much where I'll leave it for now. I'm just thinking off the top of my head some of the main things that I've taken from these cantos, but I like the way Phil set up the conversation with we can talk about why Virgil's left, the nature of cleansing in and of itself, and then the church and the empire. So
wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to share what you got from your reading this time. Who'd like to go next? Maxine, go ahead.
It seems to me that we started in the Garden of Eden, and then we come back to the Garden of Eden. Did he have to go through all that to come back to where he started? I mean, it doesn't seem that things got better. Couldn't he have stayed there to begin with and not gone through everything? Or did he commit all these sins along the way, which seems kind of indulgent to me, that he would. I just can't understand how he could come back to the Garden of Eden and things wouldn't be. There's like a naivete that he started with, but he can't go back to naivete after he's gone through all these things. So what are we doing?
Wonderful. So what we'll do is that we will handle that question in the Q&A, because both you and Joe brought up that question. So that's definitely one of the questions we're going to discuss. And I would like to have everybody's take on that. So we'll definitely do that. Folks, anybody else who wants to share what you got from your reading? Allison.
As I read this, I was thinking a lot about what Doug was saying last time about the sense of movement in this. And I really feel like it's so theatrical. Like you could see it as a dance, a play on Broadway, you know, anything like that, an opera. And one of the things that I noticed was that he seems to have like a theme and variations. So he had, I think it was the shades and the gluttonous, but they were moving in two lines in opposing directions. And then like a few cantos later, he has the shades moving together in the same direction. And then right after that, he had the elders moving in the same direction, but with crowns on their head. So it's like he's taking this idea and he just keeps building upon it, building upon it, building upon it. And then one thing that I thought was like throughout it with all the vices, for each one, I was like, all right, that one makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm going to be honest, when I first got to the lust part, he kind of lost me because I was like, you know, where would we be without lust, right? I mean, it's the spark that creates life. Like, why is he so hard on this one, really? But then when he gets to Beatrice, you can see his love for her, but the lust is still a big component of it. So I think what he's trying to show is that at the highest level, it is both lust, it's friendship, it's love, it's all of these things combined. And I think that's where he was going with it. And it's still sort of the same idea of this like theme and variations. And then the other thing that I thought was really almost, it was funny to me because we always have this image of women in the past as being so submissive and know your place.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Just testing, testing.
Just a second. Hold on.
But he meets her and she just like rips him to shreds, which I did not expect at all. I didn't. So I thought that was very interesting how that happened. But anyway, and then the other thing is then when they go through the ring, you know, of fire, that to me was just like straight out of an opera at the Met. I mean, it was beautiful, really, you know. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts that I had in general.
Okay, just hold on for a second. All right, next up is going to be Madeline. Just hold on. All right, Madeline, go ahead. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's not your fault. There are idiots in the world. Thank you, Doug, for doing that whole the chart presentation. There were a few things. One, of course, was I was once again struck by how vivid all his imagery was and how consistent Dante has been throughout the cantos in both the previous book and this one. Right down to the smallest details, like when they were in these last 12, there was one point where they were turning, and they were turning as if they were wheeling about like armies on a plane, you know, with one fixed center, and he was part of where the smaller wheel would be. And it was so consistent with other turning metaphors he'd used. I got the sense in this somehow, I don't know, just that since he'd written this in exile, that this has a tone of nostalgia to it. especially near the end, some sort of yearning for what he lost and some effort to recreate it, and a looking back on what did I do wrong that might have, cast me out of the primeval paradise I was in. And what Doug had said about the role of women, I had noticed that too, because poor Beatrice, it's a good thing she's an anima figure, because no human woman women don't hold up very well on this level of projection. Like in Canto 30, she's portrayed first as the three theological virtues. Then she is a reproachful mother to her son. Then we have, excuse me, Canto 31, she becomes a swordsman, attacking him with her tongue and using a sword metaphor. She is a judge sitting with Christ in our court. And she also becomes a scolding mother. And I think that this, luckily she's an anima figure, as I said, so I think that this return to the trees and the return to Eden is a way for him to reclaim his soul.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Next up is going to be Michael.
I just wanted to say, Madeline, it's Phil who did those incredible charts and talked about all those things you mentioned, not me. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Those charts amaze me.
Thanks. Yeah, I had his face in mind, but I guess I said your name.
No worries, no worries. I can double as Doug.
He can do anything.
Phil, that's going to be a tall order, You'll have to be able to perform one-man shows, one-man plays.
I meant the other way around, but
thank you. Next up is going to be Michael. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, is my sound working?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. I've got a couple of points. First off, we've touched on it tangentially, but there's a lot more to be said about the role of music and the selections, especially in the Purgatorio. The progression is from in the comedy in general is from noise, basically musical noise in the Inferno, to music, which evolves from chant to polyphony in the Purgatorio, and then moves on to the harmony of the spheres in the Paradiso, and that's very interesting. And along with that, the selections that we see are related to the liturgical character of the Mass of Dante's time, and it goes along with or underscores the cleansing and preparation portion of the ritual. So I think there's a lot there, and there's quite a bit of material that's been written on this, and there are a lot of open questions still too. On the question of Beatrice, one of the issues with Beatrice, or the key issue with Beatrice, is that Beatrice represents a change in the object of love for Dante. We're moving from the earthbound love that is typical for humankind to a more to a spiritual love, and that so there's a lot of that, and Beatrice criticizes Dante for not being faithful to her And the key way that he has not been faithful to her has been to follow his lusts and not to elevate, not to go with Beatrice into the next world. He did not take that step, and she's pretty aggravated at him about that. And I think this also relates a little bit to her attitude toward his sadness at the loss of Virgil. We learned very early on why Virgil is in limbo. He lived at a time when Christianity, young as though it may have been, was available to him, and he did not accept it, and so he's in limbo. He's a virtuous pagan, but now his time has run out. He can no longer, once the transition is made from the last remnants of earthly humanity, Virgil's got to go. He needs it. Dante is going to need a new god. And Beatrice gets ticked at him because he's so regretful about that. And this is more of Dante not taking that next step up. I think that one of the things about the historical references, and I'm kind of all over the place because there are a lot of different things, but one of the things about the historical references I think we should try to remember is that for us, when we're talking about the historical figures and allusions that Dante is writing about, they are historical. They're way back there. For Dante's readers, that's current events in a lot of cases, and certainly the figures that are involved in the warring between the various cities and factions, that's real world stuff. And I think that there's an urgency in that, and Dante is doing that partly to say, hey, look, this is what I'm talking about here has real world consequences. People do these things. This is the kind of stuff that happens, and there you have it. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. We're kind of all over the place, but what are you going to do?
Yes, it's covering a large ground. Next up is going to be Philip, followed by Doug. Phil.
I just want to make a quick note on what Michael said. Virgil died in around 20 BC, so he actually never had a chance to convert to Christianity. Statius, on the other hand, who was a contemporary of Virgil, did have supposedly Dante makes him saved. So there's a little bit of a complexity there. It's not as clear cut as maybe we want to portray it. Also, of course, as was already mentioned, Cato, who lived in BC and died in BC, is the guardian of Purgatory and apparently saved. Trajan is another Roman example of a pagan that historically has never converted to Christianity, but is apparently also in saved. So there's a lot of ambiguity. I just want to, it's not all clear cut. That's what makes this, I think what makes this work so interesting is there are a lot of things like that make it interesting to think about why is it this way and not some other way. So I just wanted to point that out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Doug. Doug, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up a little bit on the movement things that Allison referenced. the movement of the Purgatorio seems to be, I mentioned that thing, there are acting principles of what you're attracted to and what you're repulsed by and frightened by, and what you love and what you hate or what you fear. And those things I realized pop up a lot in Purgatory. And there are this whole rhythm of what Chardy calls whips and reins, meaning it's not whips as in punishment, it's more like spurs that drive you on to something, and the other, which is an example of virtue, which you are attracted to doing and imitating. And then there is the fear of punishment, which you want to avoid. So what you're attracted to and avoid, and the rhythm of each of these 7 sins, there's an attraction to a good model and an aversion to a terrible punishment. So that's a constant movement in this of what spurs people on to maybe good acts, and the fear that makes them avoid the bad acts. So this sort of good, bad, love, hate, fear, whatever is a real through line. So I think love is the real primary thing, which goes back to the classics with Venus and to Beatrice, and then to the muses. What I found is there's constant repetition and reference to Parnassus, which is the Mount of Poets, and those who are living openly on the sides of the mountains, and those are hidden in crevices of Parnassus. And there are a lot of crevices in Purgatory. So Purgatory itself is I'm beginning to wonder, maybe this is a question for everybody, whether it is a Parnassus of sorts, that it is the journey of the poet. And I think when what I would call, I was sort of shocked by the brutality or the toughness of Beatrice. But then when I sort of read her rant carefully, when she finally calls him to the task, it's really calling a poet back to the task and the mission and the journey that he's avoided by getting lost into worldly things. That he had a vision of love, he had a vision of beauty, which are the ultimate love of God, love your neighbor, which are the prime commandments in the New Testament. And he's driven by love. He even says, when he reviews the Sweet New Style, he says, love is something I experienced and I took down, kind of like dictation, what he experienced when he was experiencing love as a principle or as a reality with a person. And so so he's in a way love's scribe. And then he loses his way. And I think, to me, this is the most terrifying part of Purgatory, is the times I, as an artist, have seen a project I should follow through on, and I haven't. That there is a gift I have and there's something I should be doing, and sometimes I've done it and it's felt good for a while, but then another project emerges that I should be working on, and I don't always make the transition to working on that. And so that's a betrayal of Beatrice, the anima. It's a betrayal of the muses. And that's what she's beating him up for, is you have failed your purpose. And you have failed, which is Bucky's thing, that each person is designed to do something extremely unique. And this gets back to Phil's use of the wax and the seal, that he hasn't really taken the seal until the end. And then he says, okay, you've really hit me with the seal, and now I will remember this. And I will not avoid my calling. It's like Jonah. Every artist has a vision of what they should do. And sometimes they hide in the belly of the whale and they don't do what they know they should be doing. And for me, that's the most terrifying part of Purgatory, making me think of the visions that I have not followed up on. And Beatrice at the end of Canto 30 basically spells this all out. And she even says, oh, I was hoping he'd be woken up by dreams, or I hoped he'd be woken up by something. And I realized he can only wake up if he sees hell and the punishments of hell. That's the only thing that's going to wake him up. So she lays out in her rant at the end of Canto 30 the whole sin of the poet, which also connects with what I realized when I saw Phil's chart for the Inferno, that the deepest circles of hell are for the sins of language, where language is misused to seduce people, to mislead people, to drive people to division. So it's a poet's job that Dante has failed to do. He has failed to clarify the world. He has failed to pursue what she calls the path that leads to truth. That's what she says very near at the end of Canto 30. He has betrayed that calling. So he's being punished by her verbally because he has failed his purpose as a poet, which is to pursue the love of her and what all that entails. You know, the spirit of love. He's gotten lost in shallow things.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. David, would you like to share what you got from Purgatory so far?
Oh, I thought that was eloquent, what we just heard. I think we have to take it universally as having a responsibility to harness and master our natural logical selves, our rational selves as a first discipline, and then to find that there's something beyond that and recognize that. So, so poets, maybe we all have to be called, in some sense, poets to bring. Well, we'll see how that fits. I don't see how non-poets bring it into the world according to this story, but maybe that'll unfold for me. So there's a lot to go. Thanks.
Wonderful. So folks, wait a minute. Elena, go ahead.
Yes, so I'll try to be not just take less time. So what I see here, and again, I think Doug mentioned it very well, and he described it quite well. So and everyone else added to it. So we started at some point, and it looks like we came to the same point where we started, but we came as entirely different being back to the same point. And in order to become to come as a being of different qualities, that's what had to happen. The whole journey and self-discovery and facing multiple, say, fears and multiple vices and whatever else, because it all was hidden. Virgil, so basically that you have to be lost in the woods, and you are lost in the woods, and you don't know, you don't see what's in the way, you don't see what's encumbering the vision of the paradise, because the paradise is right here. So you have to basically what that's what happened. The journey had to be taken. And my question is, just going back to the question. So in order to transition to Paradiso, the third and final place in this journey, it seems to be like the seventh terrace in Divine Comedy is where those who are there never left the boundaries of their burning. And their burning could be fears and feelings they have not acknowledged and they never felt. So anyone now I'm addressing Hollywood crowd, if anyone knows how to feel the feelings, anyone who could share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. We will do questions after we come back. So after the breakout rooms, we're going to do questions. You're welcome to ask the question at that point. Next up is going to be Judy. Judy, go ahead.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused between the souls, the angels, and the friends. I would like also to understand who gets forgiven and who doesn't. It seems like the people that commit mortal sins, they don't get forgiven. Only the people that commit venial sins. And I can't wait for Beatrice to come into full swing, because I think that she has so much power to forgive also. She's a very powerful figure, and she's been lurking in the back from several cantos before. And so, yeah, really interesting. So that's basically my concern.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. So what we'll do is that we're going to go ahead now. Folks, we are going to go into the breakout rooms to discuss this with each other in a small group. And then when you come back, put on the table the best question that you have. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right. So now it's time for the lightning round of questions. So we're going to start by putting all the questions down. and we're going to organize them, and then everybody gets to answer them. So anybody who wants can answer them. So anybody who wants now gets to put their questions on the table. Go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions. It's going to be Joe followed by Elena. Joe, what's your question?
First of all, we had a great breakout room. Like, we could have been there for a while. But one of the questions that had come out is that whether, Dante's interacting with so many poets during this journey. And is he comparing him? My question is he comparing himself to these other poets, or is he trying to take, and Michael kind of can maybe clarify, is he trying to take poetry in a new direction altogether? So
wonderful, excellent. Is he trying to compare himself to other poets or taking poetry in a new direction? Okay, next up is Elena. Elena, what's your question?
Okay, I unmuted myself. My question is, so I just brought it up in a very direct way in my group, and I had an amazing group. And thank you everyone for the feedback. So and so basically we're right now in Purgatorio, and what came up is that you have to be there till you naturally would transition to the next step. You have to be there till it will, because if you are forced to experience those experiences and face what you need to face. So what do you, anyone could add to what's going to happen to transition to the Paradiso, and what was missing to have this natural transition to the next level?
Thank you. Excellent. So about the transition from Purgatory to Paradiso, what are its conditions? How does it happen? Okay, anybody else wants to put a question? Doug, you had a question about the poet's journey. What was the question? Can you phrase it? You need to unmute.
I have two questions. Maybe they're actually related in a strange way. Is Parnassus, which is the mountain of the poets, is Purgatory a kind of parallel with all of its crevices and its exposures to the light and the exchange of light and dark? Is it kind of a Parnassus of its own? And the other is the issue of the imagery, the astonishing imagery that gets reduced by the commentary. And how do you keep the power of the imagery, like in a dream, the energy of a dream, which may lead to more change than the explanation of a dream, which sort of sets the dream aside. I mean, and so the issue came up in our group about laws and interpretations of laws, and when the interpretations and commentaries kind of get political, that they have a political agenda. So I kind of like that question, if anybody has any thoughts about that. How to keep the imagery alive, the intensity of that procession versus the encyclopedic sort of stolidity of the explanations.
Wonderful. Okay, very good. Next up, commentary, encyclopedic commentary. Okay, how do you keep the intensity of the imagery alive while doing the encyclopedic commentary? Next up is going to be Madeline. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering, it seems that now we have a big emphasis on fixing people, kind of an engineering approach, like hack your brain with CBT, or 5 minutes of mindfulness every day helps you sleep better. Like there's a little homunculus inside that is making rational decisions about, like we're little self-repairing robots. And the Purgatorio is so different with in its feeling of its emphasis on healing of the whole person, starting with the soul. And I'm wondering if anyone else has noticed the difference between that healing versus fixing.
Okay, very good. Healing versus fixing. Excellent. All right. Does anybody wants to put any more questions on the table? Okay.
He had a question about why people get punished, why they don't, who gets off, who doesn't, and why, you know.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Who
Some
gets
sins that seem
forgiven?
terrible and people get off, and, you know.
Yes, I'm going to include that, and we'll also take the question which Maxine and Joe put on the table about Garden of Eden. David.
Yeah, right. Ooh, am I silenced here? Yeah. So if this is premature, that's fine. I just want to ask if we yet know what it is about divine love, about that pursuit, which is, have we clarified that between the other loves and have we made it clear how we clear the smoke? I mean, he drank the waters and he'd gone through this whole process. Do we yet understand what it is that he's done? He's dismissed the physical Beatrice, that she said that, but you know, how much insight do we have, or do we have to wait until we've really gone through 9 more levels?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's see. Let's look at the order here. Let's start with Maxine and Joe's question. How come we start with Garden of Eden and end up in Garden of Eden? Any thoughts about it? Just wait a minute. Allison, did you want to put a question on the table or answer?
I had a question. Yeah, why is it always women's job to police men's behavior? Whether it's Eve or Beatrice, like, why do they have to do it? I don't feel like doing that job.
Okay, very good, very good. Excellent. So now let's go to the answers. We are going to answer about, we're going to start off with Garden of Eden. How come we end up in Garden of Eden? It's going to be Phil followed by Joe. Phil.
Yeah, we had touched on a little bit of this in our group. So we actually, as far as the Commedia goes, we don't start in the Garden of Eden, of course. We start in the dark woods. And so we're lost. And that's how the whole poem is set up, as a redemption of sorts from a place that is not ideal. Now, as far as history goes, yes, we start in the Garden of Eden, but then we fall. And so the reason we end up there is because we need to get back to where we were in order for us to go higher. You can't, if you make a wrong turn, you can't get back on track until you retrace your steps. So essentially, we are retracing our steps, which is a lot harder this time around, because now we have an extra thing. We're not innocent anymore. We have this bent to do and love wrong things. And Dante's thrust in the poem, as he is pretty much explicitly states, is to get us back on track, is to first show us the wrong way, which is what we are doing in Inferno. And then in Purgatory, we're trying to get fixed, if you will, so that we can be unbroken, because we are broken and we need to be unbroken in our outlook. And that's what he is doing. So when we are fully fixed, we are back to where we started, right? But that's only so we can go high, which is Paradiso.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe. Joe, what do you think?
Thank you.
You know, one of the things that it just occurred to me, and I didn't think of it at the time when I asked, but one of the things that in the first lecture of the series from Yale, he mentioned that this is a journey, a circular journey, an encyclopedia of knowledge. And this is, to me, knowledge of the human condition. And it's ultimately about ethics, right? So, but this is how he's taking us through the journey of what it means to be a human being, and we're arriving back at where we fell from. So I think that's my understanding, is that this is the full circle of knowledge, and the tree of knowledge, actually, if you think about it.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Doug.
Yeah, I think in what we've just read, there's a reference to the Garden of Eden being what the classical poets referred to as the Golden Age. And in Ovid's Metamorphosis, he talks about the descent from the Golden Age to the Silver Age to I can't remember, bronze or brass, finally to the Iron Age. And I don't think in the last few thousand years we've escaped out of the Iron Age. And so, but there's this idea of getting back to the garden, you know, as the song goes.
Wonderful. Thank
So
you.
that's all.
Thank you. So we're going to go to the next question. I want to remind you that there is an amazing meetup on a similar topic coming up at 7 o'clock. This is going to be on the thought of Romano Guardini. He's the most influential religious thinker of the 20th century that I know of, who has dramatically influenced not just kind of Catholic Christianity, but Christianity itself. Because what he did was that he responded to the First World War, the Marxism, all the uncertainty, relativity, and tried to connect religion to all the previous thinkers, the Greek thinkers, and made it accessible to secular people. That's what he did. And Pope Francis did started doing his PhD thesis on Guardini, and the Pope before that was his student. So the last 4 popes have been tremendously influenced by him. But the most important thing is that he actually speaks effectively to the secular audience and makes Christianity relevant to the 20th century or 21st century. And I've got a scholar, Peter Berkman, who is going to be actually giving an overview of his thought. So I strongly encourage you to stay on at 7 o'clock to continue with that. All right, so with that, let me continue. The next question is going to be, I'm going to take a pair of questions. One is, who gets forgiven and who gets punished? And the second one is, what is the transition from Purgatory to Paradiso? What needs to happen to go from Purgatory to Paradiso? We'll start with David. David.
Yeah, on the transition one, I don't have an answer to this comprehensive question. It seems to me there is a critical thing. When he is told, you must now trust your feelings, that he has reached the point that he not only has feelings and reason to balance out, but somehow now he has gone through enough to have done some kind of purgation of the problems with feelings and balancing of feelings to make his feelings sort of recognizably not conflicted or in error, have been purified somehow because it's the right kind of love, which is why I was asking about how do we know, it's still the same attraction, but it's the right attraction. So he has to stand up with strength and power, and which he finds very hard. That transition to, okay, you prove you have a good brain, now go with your feelings, follow the force.
Wonderful. Folks, everybody is welcome to give their own answer to each of these questions. Next up is going to be Doug.
I think the two might be related in the sense that those who are punished are those who don't recognize that they did sin and don't repent and don't call on some help. And I think Beatrice is sort of delaying the end of book 2 until Dante really admits what he's done wrong and that he can't be bathed in the river of forgetfulness until he acknowledges the sins he remembers, because once he's bathed there, he won't remember his sins, so then he won't be able to admit them. So she's really delaying the ending. She's kind of like, there's a series of false exits. Okay, we're ready to go. And she's saying no. And actually, she does that long rant, which I mentioned about him betraying his path to truth. And in the next one, all he can do is kind of blubber and say, you're right, I did that. He never confesses and states his sins. He just says, you're right, I did that. He can't put more words to it than that. But once he does that, we can move on.
Thank you, Doug. Next up is Phil.
Yeah, I think David hit it on the head. And David, I also thought that was probably the most momentous event in the poem, when Virgil tells Dante that he is now, he can follow his own will. And I just want to read that line because I think it's so powerful. So Virgil tells him, await no further word or sign from me. Your will is free, erect and whole. To act against that will would be to err. Therefore, I crown and mitre you over yourself. I think that's the ideal that Dante sees as a person who is fully in control of himself, not bent by these overpowering desires. And I think any one of us, probably, I mean, myself included, it would be great if you can say that I'm so in control of my own feelings and life that I'm actually deciding based on rational choice and all, what's good for others and for myself, versus being, swayed by this feeling or that lack of love or overbearance or something like that. I mean, that's the place we're at, all of us humans. And Dante wants us to come back to that golden age, like we were talking about, where man was free to be his own king. And when I say man, of course, I mean humankind, people in general. So that is the requirement, essentially, to transition to Paradiso, is where you can get to that point. And like we were talking in our group, I'm not fully convinced that Dante believes he had gotten there, because later, of course, we have this reproach from Beatrice, and then he's still involved, not involved, but kind of the dialogue he has with Matilda. It's a little bit almost like reminiscent of some of the pastorellas. The poetry is a little more frolicking, not very serious. So I'm not totally convinced that he believes it 100%, but at least that's his paradigm that he's operating in.
Thank you, Phil. Does anybody else want to talk about this? The question of what is the transition and who gets punished and who gets forgiven? Okay, we'll go to the next pair of questions about poets. The first question is, why is it that Dante has so many poets in the story? What is the function of all these poets? What function do they serve? And is he trying to do something, say something about poetry itself? So that's one. And the second question was by Doug on, is there a parallel between Parnassus and Purgatory? So you can go ahead and talk about either of these questions. So go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to offer. Okay, it's going to be Isabella. Isabel, go ahead.
Yes, about the poets. I think that Dante talks so much about poets because he is a poet, and he's a poet above all, above everything else. He is a poet. And also, I don't know if you put in your question, Shrikant, but somebody said, is he starting something new? Is this a new poetry? I can't remember who said that. And definitely, yes. He is writing new poetry. The Divine Comedy is a new way of writing poetry. And I even think that he even tells us visually, and this one's for Douglas, a visual image is how to write this poetry. Because someone, if you're an artist, you notice when you really do something good, you know it's good. The next thing you want to do is show other people how to get there. And I think Dante is doing that right through Purgatorio, specifically when he has to go through the fire. Notice that he has to walk a tightrope between lust on one side. If he errs on one side, he commits the lust of these other poets, beautiful poets, but they went wrong. Or the other way, and he falls down the mountain. So he has to go. So what does he have to do? Carefully, you see that Virgil goes first. First, you listen to reason. Then you go very closely behind reason, but you are in the sphere of love. And then, of course, behind is Statius, who follows when they go in this parade through the fire. So in 1/3 point, in my point of view, when he mentions in Canto 20 something about the sweet new style, he's not talking about some style way back when. He's talking about what he's doing right there. Look, this that I am writing to you is the sweet new style.
Wonderfully put. Isabel, can I ask a follow-up question? How do you see the Divine Comedy as being different? How is it new? In what form, in what way do you think Divine Comedy is new poetry?
Simple answer.
Mm-hmm.
We're still talking about it and discussing about it 700 years later. I say no more.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Madeline.
Yeah, I just thought I would kind of throw this in there. First of all, I think Dante may have been lonely for the company of other poets who were in his league, and that's why he brought them in. The other thing is that I did read the first half of La Vita Nuova, and he had, I think what Doug would have called the kind of living central imagery. And then he had this encyclopedic commentary on it all, which was quite tedious in a way. And I thought that perhaps he was actually making fun of instruction manuals and the sort of how to do things, like how to write poetry and how to do things. And I wonder if there aren't some elements of his sense of humor coming up in here as well with the poets.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madeline. Phil or Doug, would you like to comment about the poets?
Doug,
am I muted? Go ahead. Go ahead, Phil.
Okay.
Oh, I could. Did you have something to say, Phil? Or?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I think Beatrice in that last rant, she kind of explains so many things. It's like dreams didn't wake him up. I try other things she doesn't mention. She doesn't list them. Other things didn't shake him out of it. I had to go to hell and talk to his main teacher, a poet who had also visited hell or written about characters who visited hell, and take him there. And so the poetry is, I think, a real through line. And clearly, whenever they meet poets, whether they're being punished or, well, so far they're all being punished in one drastic term or another, there's always a kind of really friendly embrace of some kind, psychologically or physically. Sometimes there is, and that is the school of poets that I think Dante, and that's where I'm coming to believe that Dante's sin is walking away from his gift and the rich soil where ideas were planted and they didn't grow, they didn't take root. And the whole last few sections are drenched with that. And so somebody said, well, how does that apply to people who aren't poets? Well, we all have ideas that land on the soil of our existence, and sometimes we act on them and sometimes we don't. They're an idea, oh, I should do this. I mean, recently, I think we've all had this experience. You think about a person and then you find out they've passed away, and you've had this intuition, I should call them, and sometimes you do and find out what's going on, and sometimes you don't and find out too late. So we all have these little seeds that we respond to or we don't.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Maxine, Joe, and then Phil. Maxine.
As far as Dante with the other poets, I thought perhaps it was like a competition and they were his cronies and he was giving them little digs because he was showing them something new and perhaps they weren't interested in that. So he kept bringing them up to try and convince them.
Thank you, Maxine. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, actually, I think Maxine and I are a little bit on the same page here, is that and I shudder to go after Isabel's answer because it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. But the if you think about it, if you're writing a poem and you're putting the greatest poets into this story, and you put yourself in there, you're definitely saying something. I'm comparing and contrasting our styles, but it also means you're very, very confident about what you're doing as well. So I think that's worth mentioning in the sense that you are not only saying, I walk with greatness, I walk with the greatest poets of all time. This is also the better way to do it, or a new way to do it. And I just think there is a certain arrogance that comes along with that, shall I say? But I mean, it was necessary. We're still talking about it 700 years later. So
wonderful. I also think that the way this work is he has brought in everything that he knows, everything that he thinks is valuable into this work. And great poets are close to his heart. That is one of his largest values. So it is natural that he has a critical place for them in this work. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by David. Phil.
Okay, I just wanted to point out how nuanced everything is in this work, which again, to me is a source of great pleasure, because there is not really one answer to anything. It's actually a multitude of answers you have to look at. And so I agree with almost everything pretty much that has been said so far about Dante being, first of all, founder of this sweet new style, and that his poetry was indeed something new. At the same time, we see that he is quite preoccupied with the rankings, and not even his own ranking. I mean, if you remember, we're talking about how the poets that he's talking to are ranking each other. So it's not even his own rank that they're talking about. They're talking about who is better. Is Blake better than, Tennyson or something like that? It's this kind of stuff that is so interesting. Why are they talking about this while they're being purged from all these earthly things, all these earthly preoccupations? So there's some of that. It betrays some of his preoccupation with earthly things, even though he says differently. Also, I just want to point out, at the end of Canto 26, we have this poet, Arnaud, and he actually responds to Dante in Provençal poetry. When I say Provençal, I mean lingua doc, the language of Provençal. It's in Dante's poem. Now, of course, it's translated in our, whatever, depends on what you're reading, but if you have the Italian, you can see that it switches at the end there, verses 139 to 147, and this is actual Provençal. So Dante actually knew Provençal. He was able to include it in Purgatorio. Again, just talking about his encyclopedic knowledge, it's just an amazing work that incorporates so much of different things. So if you didn't catch that, I just want to point that out. This is the end of Canto 26.
Thank you. Next up is David.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting thinking back of how few artists or even philosophers he's depicted here, and their contributions. So sort of what is the role of poets? The poets are so prominent as opposed to the other arts. And I think Doug kind of hit at this. I just, so I'm riffing off of that idea. The language is so important to him. The poets have this special role because of a power that they invoke. And it has to do with maybe recall, retelling, recasting stories, bringing back to life things that are gone, and giving us perspective so we can apply hindsight and reason and live off what has happened and make that sort of something that advances us. The way having seen all this gives reason more food and helps him purify his own soul according to the story. So somehow poets help refine the soul for us, I guess, when they fulfill that art more than other arts, I guess, in his opinion.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Thanks. Next question is, how do you keep the imagery alive, the poetry and the imagery alive, while you take in the commentary, the encyclopedic commentary? I mean, that's really a fascinating question, because it's very rare to have something which has that base, this humongous base, it's encyclopedic base, and this grandness of poetry at once. David, followed by Isabel. David.
I just want to take a quick swipe at it, because there's one easy level to this question, which is, the wonderful narrations and charty notes and everyone and summaries and detailed histories, when they're explicated, enhance the story, so you really are closer to knowing some of the things he was thinking as he did it. But then you go back to the text, and the text itself is just so overwhelming, right? I mean, it just stands, even without a commentary and its confusion, it still has so much imagery and speaks to you in so many surprising ways about branches and leaves and air circulating and flowing in the star, just every kind of approach to your senses, that I can't lose the color and power that it has when you just go right back to it. And I have a feeling just even hearing some of the Italian would also just create the colors, even without, barely understanding. So there's the work. The fact that it's comprehensive, cosmologically vast, that's good to bring before and after, but just the experience carries its own color, right?
Wonderful. Next up is Isabel, Madeline, and Allison. Isabel.
Yes. I noticed from day one, when I started rereading again the Inferno, he keeps us engaged, because he gives us a multitude of similes. These similes are everyday things: a mother picking up a child who's running away, an earthquake, or some things that are very present in the mind, not only of the Italians of 1327, or where he died in 27, of the early 1300s, but also of us, because they're everyday things. So he doesn't lose his grip on us for 1 second. And right now that we're in Purgatorio, mind you, people who read the Divina Commedia, loads of people, Inferno, Purgatorio, a little less. But by the time you get to Paradiso, you're lucky if you get about 5 or 10. And he knows it. He knows it. And you will see he'll keep as much as he can with his imagery of calling in everyday life, everyday history, the Bible that a peasant might know, a saying, a story, a gossip. He keeps it alive.
Isabel, do you read Italian?
Yes, I do.
So tell me, what is it like in Italian, original Italian?
It's quite beautiful. I don't know if anyone here speaks Italian, but I am doing a very small group, leading a very small group. And for the first time in my life, doing the Commedia, I'm reading in Italian and discussing in Italian. So if anybody feels that they have enough know-how to be able to discuss their points in Italian, please join us.
Yeah. So because what happens is that, I've noted that all great works of poetry are incredibly difficult to translate. And even when you translate, the translator has to rise at least halfway towards the originator to be able to do justice to it. So I think I'm a little bit jealous that you can read Italian. So.
But Mandelbaum is beautiful. And the one I've been reading right now, believe it or not, is Sanders and Sandow Burke, who placed the imagery in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And Philip, I was going to read, but you mentioned that there is a part of the Canto 26 in Provençal, Well, they put that part, Sanders, in Mexican Spanish. So it's quite interesting how he did that transition. I was going to read it if anybody knows Spanish, but some other time.
Isabel, may I request you to read any kind of one stanza in Italian so people get a feel of what it sounds like?
I can recite it.
Please.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai in una selva oscura che la diritta via era smarrita. Ai. That's Inferno.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, I used to know that. And Vergine Madre, figlia del tuo figlio, umile alta più che creatura, termine fisso d'eterno consiglio, tu sei colei che l'umana natura nobilitasti sì, che il suo fattore non disdegnò di farsi sua fattura. That's the prayer of Saint Bernard in Canto 33 in Paradiso.
This is so beautiful. So I'm going to request you at the end to recite something else. That would be a fitting way to end this meetup. Is that okay? Thank you. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Allison. Madeline.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. It's nice to see Italian spoken with the hands. I thought this question about keeping the central resonance of the imagery like a dream while kind of surrounding it with this encyclopedic knowledge. It sort of goes to the heart of what Dante is actually doing, because we do that all the time. Like, just say you're walking down the street, you're thinking about it, you're remembering the dream you had the night before. Your awareness is shifting from that to maybe what it means. You see someone you know, you say hello, then you stumble on the sidewalk, you become more aware of your feet. So it's that constant shuttling of consciousness between different levels that we do all the time, that Dante is doing in his poem. And I think Doug's question about it made me aware that Dante might be trying to heal us by having us engage in that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Next up is Allison.
I'm finding when I read it, I sort of start out reading, going back and forth between the notes and the poem. And then there's a point at which I have to stop. And it's just like when I go to an art museum, I might read like the beginning little blurb about it, but I kind of have to stop because I have to just let this aesthetics experience wash over me. And there's such a musicality to this poem that would be lost if I just went back and forth, back and forth. I mean, there's so many times it's like he's building this tension. Even like when you read it, like the pace of it will speed up, creating tension. And then like after he went through the ring of fire, and then it releases. And if you just are constantly going, what's this reference? What's this one? You miss all of that. So sometimes I'm finding with each thing, I'm reading it several times just to kind of get everything. And I still miss half of it, but that's how I do it.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Maxine. And then I'm going to call on Doug or Phil if they want to say something about this. You know, how do you fully take in the intensity of the poetry while appreciating the breadth of the encyclopedic observations that he's doing. Maxine, go ahead.
Why don't you read the commentary first and then go back and read the other part, and you will, so you won't have to go back and forth.
I like Rosella's strategy that Rosella talked about. She's read it about 300 times, and then you can go ahead and do the commentary in the middle sometimes. Then next up is going to be either Doug. Doug, go ahead. Well, what's your answer to the question?
Well, it's a very interesting issue to me because ever since I was in college, well, as a kid, I was fascinated by dreams and the mention of dreams in the Bible and all of that. And so, but the simplest way to go to it is take out a book of Aesop's fables, read the fable, then read the moral, and you'll see the moral is often not what the fable is about at all. It's like what the parent wants the child to learn from the fable, but the fable is more inexplicable and is open to various interpretations, sometimes even geometric or spiritual, or the whole different things going on in a story. And so I think the commentary is good, but then sometimes you have to go back and sit with the imagery and the words, the language, and hopefully you have a decent translation, because I don't read. I'm a terrible student of foreign languages, no matter how much I study them. And soak yourself in the sounds, which is hard when you're doing in English, unless it's but the sweep of the imagery, the movement of it, that's what somebody else referred to, the winds and all of this going through. The movement of it is really quite remarkable.
Wonderful. Phil.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't have a magic solution, but what I tried to do is to keep in mind that it's such a multifaceted work, and also the fact that our minds can really only focus on one thing at a time. So I try to read as many times as possible with a view of different things. So I might read it from a poetic point of view, not focus on anything intellectual or the argument, just focusing on the language, the beauty of that. Maybe then reread the same thing with a view to actually understanding and following the arguments, and maybe doing some more research and looking at the commentaries, which are very helpful. I don't know if you guys have taken advantage of the Princeton commentary, Princeton site on Dante, but it has tons and tons of references and all kinds of really good explanations. So it's really more about rereading, and the more times you read it, the more you get out of it. That's how I find it. A lot of times my first reading is actually kind of struggling with it, even though I've read it before, but still, you forget because it's such an immense work with so much depth in it. But then the more I read, the more I get into it. And then maybe by the third or fourth time, I'm really following along because I've gotten all these different things and they're all exciting at the same time. So that's my.
I completely agree with that. I mean, that's my strategy for handling all great art. Like whether I'm listening to Beethoven or something like that, because what happens is that these works are so rich and so deep, and they bring together actually so many things in life, and they actually touch so many things inside you that you need this going back again and again, because what happens is that the first passes cover some things, and because you have covered those things, the next level of things actually opens up because you have taken that in already. So it's like, and it is rare to have, I should not say that. All great artists have this, that they have this encyclopedic base and they are presenting it with this intensity. So that is the primary way in which I take in, whether, and I can see that very clearly in music. Like, Beethoven, like I have Beethoven's Fifth, I have listened to it enough that I can sing the whole thing. I can sing the main line. I can't sing all the symphony, but I can sing the main line. And that's when you really appreciate the entire complexity of it. Doug.
I only wanted to add one thing to support that. I once heard Anthony Hopkins talk, and we think, oh, he's a great actor. Apparently, he actually reads any script he does. I can't remember the number. It's either 180 times or 240 times. That's how much and I don't think he's exaggerating. I think he actually checks it off and reads the script. So he knows it from every angle. So that's read it like an actor does. And
wonderful, wonderful. Next question is on divine love as distinguished from other kinds of love. Any thoughts on that? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have any thoughts. Okay, we're going to start with David.
I know it's my question. The only thing is that what piqued my interest was how he first encounters Beatrice and then how he still hasn't got it right yet, and she's calling him down, and she recounts everything he's done wrong. And I even died to show you it wasn't my material presence that mattered, and you're still staring at me, and something's going on. He's telling us something. And so, okay, I get it. It's not the material. So divine love has to do with something completely ineffable. There's got to be more, because this is like the whole next book, right?
Yes. Wonderful. Next up is Doug.
Well, very briefly, I think the argument goes back to the Song of Songs, at least in our culture, and the argument of, is it divine love? Is it erotic love? Is it carnal love? And I don't think there are any easy answers to any of that. I mean, people try to explain it away, but it's complex.
Phil.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there's a difference between the argument that Dante makes and what he actually experiences and believes based on the way he acts and reacts. And like I was mentioning in our group, I'm not buying his argument completely, because I think there's something is going through the cracks. There's some cracks in his theory, which of course is Aristotelian and Platonic, in the sense that all beauty, all material beauty, is really a reflection of God's beauty. And that was his argument with Beatrice. But in reality, can he really live like that? Can we as human beings live like that? I think that's an open question. And I feel like I'm not convinced by both his experience and his writing and his love of earthly things. I'm not convinced that anyone can be this detached from material, earthly, physical love. And the fact that he attempts to do it, in some ways, I think that has maybe hurt the Western conception of love and sexuality and lust. I think people have mentioned that, because that's the spark that, as I'm paraphrasing somebody who I think was Allison who mentioned that before. You don't want to extinguish the physical part, but it seems that in Catholic teaching, especially, the material and the physical is really being downplayed, and that's unfortunate. But I don't think it actually really ever works.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, it's going to be somewhat of an extension of what Phil had just said. You really, in realistic terms, you can't really separate the material and the physical. But I think what divine love is unconditional love, so that it's this love that is actually coming without any kind of, and there was one part that Virgil actually refers to it in there, how God's love is different, and people in heaven are always happy for other people, whereas people that are going through purgatory are actually have things like envy and pride associated with it, that there's this love that they have for for things, but there's something that comes along with that. And whereas for heaven, it's love for everybody else. It's much more divine. It's without any kind of prior condition, and I don't see that as possible on a human level. So that would make it divine.
Thank you, Joe. Folks, we are running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to go to Isabel next. Isabel.
Oh, very quickly, I will say that it's very hard to distinguish between the two, exactly as hard as Dante was walking that tight wire. If you go too much, you go into erotic and lust. If you go to on the other side, you fall back to hell. So it's very hard. Have in mind, anybody know Bernini? Bernini is a sculptor.
Yes.
Have in mind the picture of the Spanish saint, Saint Teresa of Avila in ecstasy. Mm-hmm. Tell me, what is the difference between that and an orgasm?
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do is I want to wrap up, but I want to wrap up with first Isabel. Can you please read out another?
I've been leafing through the parts I knew by heart are Paradiso and Inferno, except I forgot it one night. But the part I'm reading from Canto 24, where it's the gluttonous, he meets Buona Giunta, a poet. So I will just read where he says, what type, how he writes, how Dante is different. So I'm reading from starting on 49, maybe just 2 terzine.
Take your time, yeah.
Okay, line 49, canto 24, the Italian. Ma di, si reggio qui colui che fuori trasse le 9 rime cominciando donne c'avete intelletto d'amore e io a lui. Io mi son che quando amor mi ispira noto e qual modo che ditta dentro vo significando. Oh frate, issa veggio. Now I see. Now I see. Notice the present. Notice the present. Just, oh, I understand now, but now he sees. What does he see? He sees Dante climbing up Purgatorio and writing a book. That's why. Okay, there's so much that could be read, but I thought that was Issa. Oh, also Issa is dialect. It's Bonaggiunta's dialect. Dante has no qualms about putting street talk, dialect, anything that will make his comedy fly.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Isabel. That was just delightful.